Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Page One podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the Page One podcast. If this is the first episode you're listening to, at the Page One podcast, we speak to writers of all descriptions, authors, screenwriters, comic writers, video game writers, about their work, about how they got into writing, and try and get some hints and tips to make us all better writers. We've got a great array of past guests that you can go and listen to. People like David Baldacci, Mike Carey, Tim Lebin, Sarah Pimborough, Peter James, Gareth Powell, and many, many more. So please do check out the past episodes in your podcast app.
Now, as you can probably hear, we are doing this one over Skype once again because we are, of course, COVID lockdown still.
Yes,
I hope everyone's out there is under lockdown, and I hope everyone out there is safe and is doing okay. Everyone's mental health's all right under the 24/7 staying inside your house. Marco, you must be down to your last tin of beans. Just about time for that supermarket run.
Yeah, I have 100 rolls of toilet roll, so I'm fine. I'll start eating that soon. No, but obviously there are far more important things in the world going on just now. But we hope that this podcast is one way that you can be distracted for 45 minutes to an hour each week and just take your mind off it all, because I know that trawling through the news is not good for anyone at the moment. If you do like the Page One podcast, we always make an appeal to please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts in particular, because it really helps us shoot up the charts. And if we go up the charts, that helps us continue to get great guests for the podcast. Speaking of which, who is on the podcast this week, Tarek?
This week we are chatting with Neil Forsyth, who is an author and probably best known for a screenwriter. Mm-hmm. Guilt was his last big show, which you might have seen on the BBC towards the end of last year.
Great dark.
He's also a really
drama.
Good dark kind of comedy drama. He's done a bunch of TV shows as well as a whole number of books. And Bob Servant, if anyone's a Bob Servant fan, is a Twitter phenomenon.
Yeah.
He's a
what is it?
How would you call him?
I think Neil called
cheeseburger.
Svengali, I think is the word that Neil used. Yeah, it started out I think as a book, and then I think it sort of was quite a niche book, and then Irvin Welsh, as Neil speaks as Irvin Welsh, picked up on it, gave it a good rating, and then suddenly it exploded. It became a TV show with
Brian
Cox, there you go, of Succession fame, and now he lives on Twitter. But I thought it was a great chat we had with Neil. We hear how he's moved through journalism into becoming an author and then a screenwriter, and we chat to him about how writing courses can be really helpful, and things like how you inject humor into what is quite a serious story in Guilt, really, but it has that underlying dark humor, as you were saying.
Yeah, and Guilt does show that you can do you can have a storyline where someone gets murdered, and you can do it one way, or you can do it a completely different way, and they can still be good dark dramas, but humor can completely change the tone of something. And Neil's got some really good hints and tips on how to use that. Yeah,
and he also has some great anecdotes. He's got a great story about Derek Acora, who is a UK or was a UK psychic, I think, and I'm waving my fingers in the air for quotation marks, because I'm slightly skeptical of such things. But anyway, we're rambling on far too much just now, so we'll get straight onto the podcast, and we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know who's on next week's podcast.
See you then.
Did you always want to be a writer? Was that always the goal?
I think I probably did if I'd been sort of pinned down for it, but I think I had the childhood and teenage experience of a lot of creative people that I didn't have the confidence maybe to overtly say that's what I'd like the plan to be. It's funny, I think I grew up in Dundee in the 90s in terms of formative years and teenage years, and there's something that probably seems a bit distant now in the internet age, but growing up in a provincial city before the internet, these things all felt very, very distant, and impossible. And even though I was good at English at school, and by far my best subject, and would be complimented on it and things like that, I kind of still felt a bit impossible and a bit showy, maybe, to say that that's what you wanted to do. It didn't feel like a career. And you know, I'm not someone that kind of went off to get a trade or anything. I still went to university, but even there, I didn't do English because it felt you felt you're pinning your colours to the mast a bit, and it had to kind of work. Whereas I did a more generic sort of arts degree, and that I felt maybe that was, again, not being quite confident enough to say this is what I want to do. I think I could do it. I think that's pretty universal and not a bad thing either, if I'm honest. I mean, I think what I did instead was go off and get a fair bit of life experience before I started properly writing, and I think that's probably stood me in good stead.
It's quite interesting because you're often going to get that there's almost two paths, isn't there? That a lot of people say, I think a lot of folks say, oh, you should definitely go down the creative writing, you know, all the qualifications down that path. And a lot of folks say the opposite and say, no, it's actually good to get some experience in stuff other than writing, and then you can bring that into your work.
I sort of did it the other way around, in that I did a screenwriting course in my 30s in New York Film Academy, and that made a huge difference to me. But I think the key was that by that point I had probably lived a life that gave me lots to write about, and I think that kind of helped. I think, you know, I get sometimes if people come and ask you to read their scripts or chat about being a writer, sometimes it's people who are looking at writing as a sort of second life, maybe after doing other things, or they've had a really interesting experience and they want to write about it, or something's happened within their life that they feel the need to write about. And that always feels to me like it's maybe got a richer hinterland for them than when you get younger people coming to you who are at university and so on. And I'm not saying they can't do it, and there's lots of examples of them doing so, but you do wonder where the depth's going to come from. In that case.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, actually, other people have said exactly the same sort of thing, that you need that life experience to create believable scenarios, I think, sometimes. But
and believable characters as well. I think
exactly.
You know, I think people talk about write what you know, and if you take that in a literal sense, it can be fairly disastrous advice. But if you take it in a more nuanced sense, then I think it's exactly right. I think it's not about occupations that you've known or specific settings or industries or anything like that. It's about characters you've known.
Yeah, that's. I mean, not everyone's been to space, but everyone's met someone who's a bit of an arse or something. You can put a character like that in a sci-fi story, and you can use that as your experience, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. It's about emotions you've known and life experience you've known and people that you've known that you can amalgamate and composite and disguise and stick them in a script. I think so. No, I do think there's lots of examples of brilliant writers who have gone off and had very, very different, diverse lives and then worked their way round to writing.
And is it right that you were first published in Dundee United Fanzine? Was that the first thing you were published in?
Yeah, Dundee United Fanzine, when the Hoodoo Comes, which was a Steely Dan song title, which referred to Dundee United's habit of losing Scottish Cup finals at home. No, that was really exciting. There was some great Dundee United. It's brilliant fanzines, and there was another fantastic one called The Final Hurdle. And I read When the Hoodoo Comes. I think I got the first edition, and they said, if you're looking for writers and contributors, I was 13 when I wrote to them and badgered them and sent them all sorts of nonsense, and they printed some of it, and I sold outside Tannadice with them. But see, my name under that contributor list was absolutely. I remember being at the game as well, watching. I'd written this. I'd taken a Roy of the Rovers comic strip, and I'd Tipp-X'd out the dialogue and written in fairly libelous stuff about some Dundee players. I was in the shed, and I could see a guy I could see this guy reading the fanzine and then turning the page to that and reading it and giving a very, very small Dundonian laugh. And that was a brilliant moment. So,
Brilliant.
That was really exciting.
Yeah, well, I think every writer wants some feedback, wants to get that positive feedback. So even that at that early stage, obviously, was good. And you, after university, did you go on to become a journalist? Is that what you did first of all?
Well, no, I went to so through university, I wrote for football magazines, fanzines, and things. And then when I went after university in 2000, I moved to London, and I worked in a couple of kind of advertising companies and pretty sort of menial graduate positions. And this was when the internet was starting to kind of get a bit more organized, and some really good football websites in those early days on the internet. And I wrote for a few of them. There's one called From the Terrace, Football 365. And I wrote kind of humor pieces for them when I was supposed to be doing my normal job. And then I wrote a couple of magazine freelance pieces, 442. My first big article was a Dundee United, former Dundee United player I knew called Ralph Milne, who was sadly passed away and was a real character. And he'd had a fairly notorious short career at Manchester United, and I took him back there for the first time since he left and wrote a kind of big feature for 442, and that was really exciting because I think made me feel I could sort of do that and take the step from websites to magazines, but it also gave me a piece to show other people, because I've never, to this day, I don't have any journalistic qualifications. So I kind of managed to graduate to magazines, and then I was hating doing the job I did, and it just wasn't for me. And I knew that I wanted to try and be a writer. And I went away. So I went traveling around the world. And while doing so, I managed to set up and sell a few more bits of football writing, interviewing people around the world and different kind of funny, interesting stories around football to a few magazines. And then when I came back from that, I moved back to Edinburgh. And I think I would have been about 23, 24. And at that point, I thought, well, I'm just going to take the plunge and try and go for it. And I worked in a few pubs in Edinburgh to kind of cover myself financially. And while doing so, slowly started to get freelance journalism work. So Scotsman and Scotland and Sunday and the Herald, I by doing these bits and pieces of football writing, they put me on the rota to do match reports. So that was the first journalism I did, and I absolutely loved that. It's first of all, as a football fan and getting to sit in the press box and go to the post-manager interviews, but it was a brilliant writing discipline because you had, I was started off doing a lot of kind of lower division games, so you'd only have maybe 300 or 400 words to tell a really interesting version of what you've just seen. You had to file it by, I think, 20 minutes after the final whistle.
Oh, wow.
It was just on the cusp of it all being internet only. So I was phoning it in. So I was phoning in the match report, and it was getting taken down by the copy team. And it was really exciting, and so to just for your storytelling, really, and you're trying to tell the story of this 90-minute football game, writing it as you go. And there was a couple of times where I did a match where there was a last-minute goal, and you
changes the whole
you've changed the whole thing. So you have to change your whole narrative in 20 minutes and go back and particularly rewrite that opening section. So I absolutely loved that job. It felt such a privilege as a big football fan, and also a huge fan of those newspapers. Particularly the Scotland and Sunday, which when I was a teenager, the Scotland and Sunday had brilliant writers writing for it. I remember Graham Spears had the Sports Diary, which was all very humour driven and things. So that was great. So anyway, got match reports, slowly made my way into them, letting me go and interview players and do features and things. So I used to do a bit of that. And then from there, I managed to get work for the kind of men's magazines, FHM and Maxim in particular, and a bit for Loaded. And it interesting stories, feature writing,
Yeah.
little snippets I'd find in newspapers and think, oh, that could be something bigger.
And would you pitch this? Would you write to them and say, I've seen this article, I've sparked something, I want to do a story on this type thing?
Yeah, that's all I was doing. So I was, and again, a great skill to learn how to pitch a story.
Yeah.
That's what this business is all about at any level. And, writing a sort of one pager of why I think this would be a great 3,000 word article, and sending that in, and also just being quite self-driven with it and a bit of an entrepreneur with it. And I wrote for a couple of American magazines again, which I just approached with samples and found out the email addresses of editors. And it was the sort of last hurrah for freelance journalism, to be honest. When I was doing it, it was still, particularly America, there was still quite a lot of budget for good long form journalism.
So has that whole market changed now then for people who wanted to go into that area now? Is it completely different?
I think it's much, much more difficult, to be honest. I remember I used to do a bit for the Guardian Weekend, doing kind of longer features for them. And even in the time I did wrote for them, possibly maybe over 4 or 5 years, I think the rates fell by potentially, I don't know, maybe 40% or so. Wow. So it was a shrinking market. I mean, I wrote for a succession of lads mags that kept going bust, or they'd come back with a slightly different name after being vulture capital funds would come in and buy them. I mean, I wrote for one magazine, Front, where it was just hilarious. Every month when you got paid, it was a different company name that was paying you. It was a wild ride, though. It was great fun, really fun, interesting stuff. I used to do a lot of behind the scenes features with bands and things like that, and it was so I really enjoyed it. It was so I kind of slowly I worked less in the pub and more in the journalism, and having a lot of fun. And then I think I was 28 when my first book was published. And that was just a result of the journalism. I found this little snippet in the Scotsman. Was it the Scotsman, I think, saying that this Glaswegian teenager had been convicted of stealing £2 million in credit card fraud and just spending it going around the world. And his name was Elliot Castro. And I did what I usually did, which was work out, right, how can I get to that guy to get an interview and then try and sell it to a magazine. So I knew I think he'd been at Staines Court or something. So phoned the court and they said, well, anyone from here gets sent straight to Wormwood Scrubs. So I wrote to Wormwood Scrubs, just with no prisoner name, just his name. And he wrote back to me, and he then got moved. He got moved to Ford Open Prison in Sussex, and I had sold that idea to Maxim magazine, went and interviewed him. And again, this was good. This was when the magazine still had kind of 3,000 word articles. Yeah. So you could really get into a story and speak to other people around him and give it a bit of colour and depth like that. So I wrote it for Maxim, and then I sent that article, and this is still something writers could do, definitely. I took that article, I said, well, I thought this could be a book. And I sent it with some other samples to literary agents, which is definitely the first place to start if you want to write a book. And I just remember thinking, right, I'm going to send this to 100 literary agents. I'm going to make myself do that. I had to work hard just to find the addresses and everything else. And I did it. I did it over a few weeks period. And I think I heard back from, I don't know, in terms of positive responses, I think there was 2 or 3. And then there was one who ultimately said that he'd sign me and send it out as a big proposal.
So did he sign you on the back of, not on you had the magazine article, but you didn't have, the usual thing of 3 chapters and a synopsis and all that sort of thing. Instead, it was more a pitch that he signed you on.
He signed me on the pitch, but then he made me write a couple of chapters before we went out to publishers. So he signed me on the basis of the pitch and some writing samples. But for these people, they're not, the only signing you is a kind of pretty vague term, really. Yeah. I mean, he was sort of committing that, okay, we'll send out this big proposal and see how we do, and so it's not a huge commitment from their end, and he could see he had a chance of selling the book. But he was brilliant, and he's still my book agent. He helped shape it for me, and we sent it out. And Elliot was still in prison when we sent it out, And Macmillan, we got down to 3 or 4 publishers that were really keen. And one by one, they just started to get a bit nervous about what were they glorifying this, and were elevating a character who'd been a professional criminal for a while. And we kept saying, look, he's a nice guy. I mean, we were a bit more to our argument than that, but that's what it boiled down to, because they're thinking in terms of publicity sense, and we're going to have to put this guy forward for interviews and things. Anyway, so it got down to just Macmillan. All the others had sort of panicked a bit and run for the hills. So they said, well, we really have to meet him. And so Eliot got out of prison, got his travel pass from the prison, which took him as far as Marylebone, changed into a suit on the train, which he'd been wearing when he'd been arrested. And me and him got a taxi with David, with our literary agent, to Macmillan. And I met this 8 people there and all their different departments. And Eliot just sort of ran the meeting.
Eliot was on board with this the whole time. He knew the book was being written and he wanted you to write it.
Yeah. But he was really happy with the Maxim article, and I think he quite fancied. He was only a young lad at that time. He fancied the idea of getting a bit of notoriety, probably, and we did the book together. And so anyway, he came and he was just effortlessly charming and professional, and he'd been in prison that morning. And I said, I remember saying to him after, God, that was impressive. And he said, well, what's a professional con man, Neil? So,
like Wolf of Wall Street style, that kind of, guy who's done some bad stuff but becomes a bit of a legend, etc.
Yeah, it was great. And I think it's a decent book in terms of that genre, and we did pretty well. We got serialised in The Guardian. It sold well. It sold around the world a few places, and sold the film rights. I think we sold the film rights 3 times over the years, and we got very close. I don't think the story was, in terms, when you boil it down, it feels like very similar to Catch Me If You Can.
Okay.
And I think that probably didn't help us when it came to the film. People thought it'd be a sort of lower budget British version of the story. I think it's a more interesting story, to be honest, because he was a fascinating. Well, he's a fascinating man, Eliot. He's very, very conventional life he lives now, but he's a really nice bloke. But he was from very working class Glasgow. He bullied relentlessly. He was gay, and but had a very difficult relationship with his father as a young man. And it was and then then you put in all the great drama around the frauds he was doing. So I don't know. There's still lingering interest. So we'll see if anything ever happens to it. But anyway, that was my first book. So I think I was 28 at the time.
And then your first fiction novel was Let Them Come Through. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
so
how did that come about?
I was just I just wanted to write a novel, and I was looking for a kind of subject to light on, and I went with my friends to watch Derek Okora, who recently died. He's probably listening to this, of course. But I went to see him in Edinburgh with a few friends, and it was just so funny. It's just such a brilliantly unapologetic scam artist. And
that's what I wonder, before you go and see this stuff. I mean, is everyone in on the joke that this guy?
No,
who really believe it.
It's strange. They were huge fans, and they were completely besotted with him and utterly assured that he could do what he said he could do. But at the same time, he would sometimes make little jokes and mistakes, and they would enjoy that as well. So he got away with murder. I remember the funny thing that night was there was a woman. We're at the Playhouse in Edinburgh. There was a woman on the top deck, and he was chatting to her. And he'd done his usual. Is there a Derek or a David or a Damien until someone put their hand, and so she said, "Oh, I think that's my ex-husband." So he was calling up to her, and she had a little mic to speak down, and he was saying, "Oh, how long's Derek been passed?" And she said, "Oh, it's a few years now." And so Derek, and anyway, so Derek's going on about her ex-husband, and he said, "What's your name?" She went, "It's Mary, Derek." And he went, "Oh, Mary, I can hope you don't mind. I'm looking into your life. I can see everything about you and your experiences and your lovely lady, Mary." "Oh, thank you, Derek. Thank you, Derek." And she goes, anyway, he got to the end, and he said, Wonderful, Mary. Wonderful speech. Stand up, Mary. Round of applause. And she went, no, Dad. No. And he went, oh, don't be nervous. Don't be nervous, Mary. She went, no. He went, come on, Mary. I know everything about you. You deserve it. Stand up. She went, no. She went, I'm in a wheelchair, Derek. And it was priceless. So anyway, from that evening, I thought, well, I think I want to write one about a medium. So that's what Let Them Come Through became. And I've written 2 novels and I wrote another called San Carlos, based in Ibiza. And it's funny, they're incredibly difficult things to do. Write as a writing exercise in a novel. It's much, much harder than a screenplay. And I have no desire to ever write another one again. But I'm very proud of the 2 that I've written. I think they both hold together. But it's also, in a pragmatic sense, it's a tough old game writing books. Even then it was hard, and it's got even harder. And Let Them Come Through what was put out by Serpent's Tail, which was this publisher. It was a sort of indie publisher that was, I think, half owned by one of the bigger ones, and it had a fantastic artistic reputation, and it was really idiosyncratic owner. It was a lovely man, and that's the kind of publisher and the kind of book that could have been a real sort of cult hit, and it kind of really grown at a bit of, and it just didn't. And then my second novel was with Jonathan Cape, Irvin Welsh's publisher at Random House, and and that was a sort of thrillery book, fairly commercial. Again, sorry, it was kind of blink and you miss it, and then that's my experiences with both my novels. And I might be blinded by it. I don't think it's necessarily a reflection of the quality of the book, my novels. That's the thing. It's so many things have to come together for a novel to kind of catch fire, and it's even harder now with newspapers have cut them.
That's what other authors have told us as well. They've said it's these days, especially, a lot of it is down to whether they spend money marketing the book, and if they don't, then it can be the greatest book in the world, but it will just sit on a shelf and it'll pass people by. There's just so much being published that it's difficult to get word out there to get people to buy it, sort of a thing.
And I suppose the Kindle store is a blessing and a curse, because it means everyone can read a book, but it means everyone can write a book, and you've got tons more stuff to sift through, I suppose, now than you did 20 years ago. Yeah,
marketing and distribution, it's Watersons could just decide they don't fancy a book and hardly order any, and you're in trouble. And that's the thing. I mean, I just feel that I prefer writing TV anyway. But if you write a TV show and it's going to go into production, and kind of roughly what slot it's going to get, roughly what viewing figures it will get, and it'll get decent coverage in terms of reviews, and that makes some sort of kind of cultural impact and everything else. You write a novel, it's just not the case. You finish it and you chuck it into an abyss and hope it kind of resurfaces somehow.
Yeah.
It's so. I mean, some people I think are just that's what they want to do as writers, and that's fair play to them. And but I'm very, very proud of having written 2 novels, because particularly the second one I found incredibly difficult to do. But it's not something I've currently got any great desire to do again.
I mean, I suppose one of the main differences with a novel and a screenplay for TV or film is that the novel ultimately is, it's your story. Obviously, you'll get input from editors and stuff, but whereas with TV, and especially, I think the bigger the film gets, probably, the more you've got people coming in and saying, I think this should be this. You get the notes, as they say, sort of a thing. I don't know if that's been your experience, but that's what some others have said, that it becomes less your story sometimes when you pass it, when it has to pass through so many hands.
Yeah, well, I think notes. Certainly with a novel, you're going to be more light touch in an editorial input, because it's such a vast canvas that no one's ever going to have as much of a grip of the whole thing as the author. So it'd be more, certainly my experience, more sort of general little touches of notes that you can consider. But I think with script writing, the thing about notes is I think you have to be careful, because a lot of emerging writers are people who would like to get into script writing. Sometimes you speak to them or they drop you a line, and their big thing is, I don't want don't want people to interfere with a vision or something. And I think it comes from to be honest, I think frankly it does come from a couple of podcasts as well. Like there's a couple of brilliant writing podcasts, but they're maybe hosted by kind of very successful screenwriters, and they'll talk occasionally disparagingly about producers' notes or input, and they're kind of in a position to do that.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I've become a much better screenwriter because of getting given notes, along the way. And I think you should not fear that part of the process. It can go either way without doubt, and you have to try and work with producers that you trust creatively, that you feel that have an ability to give notes without it becoming a difficult and strained part of the process, and actually make it a positive part of the process. And you just have to have the confidence in yourself not to be defensive. That's the other thing. Like with new writers, and I was definitely like that, you're kind of, because you're a bit insecure, your reaction is to become a bit defensive and a bit more or less receptive to other people's opinion on your work. Whereas once you become more confident in your writing, perversely, you're willing to hear more people's opinions on your work, because you know that you'll just take what you think's right, and you're confident you're confident enough to say no to anything else, and you can back it up and your reasons behind it. And I think that I've worked with some very difficult producers when it comes to notes. I've had my share of horrendous war stories on that front. But I've done quite a lot of American developments, and there's a couple of them that were very hard. But by and large, now I'm at the stage where I've got proper pals who are very good producers that I can choose to work with, and then it's not hard. I mean, I think you're in a good relationship with your producer when you send off a script that they'll read and come back with notes, and you're looking forward to hearing their notes. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And in the past, I've been in a situation where I've sent off a script and almost immediately felt sick at thinking, what the fuck's going to come back here? Both in terms of quality of note, the way it was delivered, and how strained the conversation was going to be. Whereas by and large, now certainly I send it off and think, I'm really looking forward to their thoughts on this, because I know that they'll have some thoughts that'll make it better. That's the thing. So don't fear notes at all. Just try and be careful in who's going to be giving you them.
And how did you make that jump then from the books into the world of script writing?
Well, I wrote the Bob Servant books.
I did want to ask about them, because I found him on Twitter. I think he's quite massive on Twitter, and he's quite a character. For those who don't know, he's like a cheeseburger tycoon. I think he's
cheeseburger Svengali, I think he calls it.
And are you writing the tweets on that account? I'm
afraid so. Yeah, I keep meaning to delete it, but then Michael McKean followed him, and I thought, well, I can't delete it now. But, no, it's a good outlet for my kind of madder thoughts. But with Bob Servant, I wrote I just started replying to spam emails, pretending to be this Londonian cheeseburger van owner called Bob Servant. I can't particularly remember why. I was single at the time. And it was just, and then I had my literary agent, because I'd done the Elliot Castro book by this point. I think I'd done my novel as well, actually, and let them come through. And I shared a few with him, and he said, "Oh, this would be a good sort of Christmas book." And that was it. So I ended up doing 4 Bob Servant books. I did 2 books of the email exchanges. I wrote his biography, Hero of Dundee. And then the last book was Ask Bob, which was sort of questions from readers and fans for Bob to answer. But so I wrote these Bob Servant books, and I mean, this is the thing about having a kind of creative career. There's things like hard work and ability, but luck has to be part of it without any doubt. And hopefully you're in a position to take advantage of it. And the Delete This at Your Peril, the first Bob Servant book had come out, and it got initially got published by a small London publisher who were very good people, but they just didn't really know what to do with this book of email exchanges with a fictional cheeseburger van owner, understandably. So it kind of came and went pretty quickly in terms of that first publication, and then it was out of print. And then I was living in New York at the time, working as a journalist, and I think I'd started going to the screenwriting course at that time. But I got two things happened very quickly to get one after another, where one of them was I got an email from a friend who said, have you seen Esquire magazine? And Esquire had done an article where they'd asked authors to name their funniest book ever written. And it was all these really kind of big successful authors. I remember Bret Easton Ellis was there and a few others. And they're all talking about kind of literary comedic fiction and such like. And then Irvine Welsh got asked, and he said, delete this at your peril by Bob Servan. And I had no idea that he'd been given a copy of this book. It'd been out of print for about a year. And it was in Esquire magazine with this great kind of glowing quote from Irvine. So as a result of that, I think I went back to a Scottish publisher, Berlin, and they republished it off the back really of that quote. And then it had this really much bigger second life, and it got to BBC Scotland, and Owen Bell, the producer at BBC Scotland, got in touch with me and said, really love the book, have you considered adapting the character for radio or possibly television? And that began the process of the adaptation.
And you had been to the screenwriting school, you said, in New York by this stage, is that right?
Yeah, the chronology I can't quite work out. I think it must have been about that, because I came back from New York to do the radio series of Bob Servan. It was the first scripts I'd written, and I was kind of ready to come back to Scotland anyway. But I came back specifically to record that series. Moved back to Edinburgh. So yeah, they must have approached me when I was over there doing the screenwriting course.
And what did that course, because there's sometimes a cynicism around you can't teach someone to write and all this sort of stuff. So what did that course help you with? How did it help you?
It was really instructive. There was a fantastic teacher, an American screenwriter called Seth Donsky, and he just broke it down and made it less scary, I suppose, for himself. It wasn't too, it was a lot of structural stuff, and it was really aiming you to write a film screenplay. So it was kind of on that world. But we talked a lot about there's stuff I learned in that course that I definitely still use today. I think in general, in terms of the screenwriting approach, in terms of being taught and researching and reading, I would be a huge advocate of that, because I think it's about soaking it all up, and you often don't realize you've done so. And I kind of read voraciously, particularly in that period, screenwriting books. And I think the thing about screenwriting books is you should just read every single one you can, because you'll take as much from a really bad screenwriting book as you'll take from a good one, because you'll think, well, I don't agree with that. And then you have to work out why you don't agree with it. And all these things are doing, that more academic approach, is helping you to find your voice. That's the thing. And so it's not this idea that you go through courses and read books and come out with this slightly robotic, generic approach. You might do if you don't have anything within you to start. But if you're a natural writer, the more you do of these things, the more it's doing is helping you shape your voice, because you might see something you agree with and you think, well, I think that's how I write anyway, but maybe if I do it like this, that'll make it a bit more structured and work. And again, you'll grow confident in your voice by being able to reject things you don't agree with. So I couldn't recommend that enough, of immersing yourself at an early stage in the writing career and in the more academic side of it. But certainly, specifically with that course, there was a lot. I mean, one of the biggest things I remember him saying was he always wanted the inciting incident of a story to happen as quickly as possible in the script. And I remember him, people would be reading out the first 10 pages, and he'd be sitting in the corner of the room saying, "Where is it? Where is it?" as they got further and further into these 10 pages, because he didn't feel that anything significant had happened yet. That I probably took all the way to writing Guilt, where the inciting incident is in the cold open of the first episode. And then lots of stuff about character and the actions of, he used to really take the piss out of people's actions in a script if they didn't make sense. And I remember him really taking the piss out of me when I said about aeroplanes falling out the sky out a window in an airport or something. And he was like, that sounds like that was a major disaster. And it was because I was trying to be lyrical about how planes were landing. He said, just write planes landing.
Right, okay.
And he concision, I think that's the other thing, being concise in a script. He was relentless about that, and that's something that I think I'm decent at, of just being so concise. And I think that would be one of my bits of writing advice, definitely, in with your script, is evaluate every single line, every single word, and then extrapolate that out. And every scene, does it have to be there? Are there two scenes that could be composited into one and condensed into one? Is there two characters that could be condensed into one? It's just boiling it down, and that's something I definitely took from. And I think I took that from journalism as well, actually, where you have a word count and you try and squeeze as much story you can into it.
I mean, I think a lot of that I definitely can see that in your most recent show, Guilt. I think the first episode, so much happens in that first episode. Like 45 minutes or like an hour long, but you've got the incident, as you say, in the first 10 seconds of the episode, and there's so many twists and things happen at like a lightning speed, and it really is, as you say, kind of pared back to the bare essentials, and it's really well paced the whole way through.
But I think what the difficulty with, I think sometimes with a script, when they say, right, be concise, people get afraid that you can't
have a character.
Yeah, exactly. How do you display the characters? But obviously, in that, if you write it properly, then you can get great characters, as there are in Guilt. They're amazing characters through I don't know, showing, not telling, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah,
well, just now, like, what I find when I write a script is that I'll write the outline, which is really plot driven. It's just and often producers will say to me, it feels like there's a bit much going on, and then I know there's not. And not only is there not too much going on, when I then put that outline into the script to start with, if I'm writing a 1 hour BBC script, which you want to be about 60 to 65 pages, I'll probably be on about 45, 50 pages when I've written a first draft, because that's just the plotting. And then it's when I go through and start adding character,
right?
And and that's when it spreads out to the length. So I think it's when you're outlining, make sure your plot works. Once you get that into a script, start to enjoy the characters more, and you'll find those moments, and find character moments within story. That's the key as well. Don't have a scene where this is just about showing this side of the character. You need to show that side of the character when it's making a story impact, and finding that balance between it. But I think the other thing is, think of plot is your structure, and that's your skeleton to work off, and if that is nice and solid, then that's when you can relax and enjoy character more. But the plot has to be there first, because otherwise you'll just end up with a script that wanders about and you think you're telling some great insight into the male psyche, but nothing's happened for 8 pages,
I'm sure I've seen those TV programs as well.
I think I've read a few.
And I think you'd said that you saw something like Fargo as a kind of inspiration almost for Guilt, in the sense that it has that kind of strong drama, but with moments of kind of humor running through it. And when you're writing, I wondered, when you're writing a comedy that's a kind of black humor, how do you know how far to push a joke, or because it's with Guilt, there's someone getting run over, there's funerals, etc., there's death. How do you know where that line is and how far to push a joke and when something goes too far?
It has to be a character reacting in an honest way to a situation, and within their reaction, within their voice, they say something that you could construe as being funny. That's kind of how strict you have to be with it, I think. Otherwise, it's a character making a joke or saying, in inverted commas, a funny line. And that just doesn't do anything for the story, and it takes you out of the story. And it needs to be, this character they're so angry with another character, they're going to employ fairly dark humor against them, or they're so frustrated with a situation or desperate in a situation, they're going to say something that is funny because you're seeing it's a mirror, it's a little window, sorry, into their kind of desperation or frustration. And I think that's the thing. And also Brian Cox said an interesting thing to me when he was shooting Succession, which is such a fantastic show. And they often will, because it's got writers who are brilliant with drama and comedy, often I think on the day they'll punch it up a bit and they'll have a few different alts of kind of funnier lines that they'll maybe then reduce down in the edit. And Brian said, I always think you want to have, with a drama, you can have one funny line in a scene, he feels that's the balance, because then the scene's still being dramatically driven, but you have that little nuance within it. And he told me that a couple of years ago when he was filming it, and I've thought about that a lot. And I tried to kind of enact that a bit myself. So but it's getting that interwoven within it. I think the thing that I always struggle with a lot of British drama is when you've just got 6 hours of pious, dry people staring at rain-spattered windows, and it's just it's painful, it's not, and it's less real. That's the thing.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah, it makes it real. People do have dark humor. We'll see things that are maybe inappropriately funny in real life. So it does definitely make it more realistic, I think.
Exactly, like gallows humor, or getting the giggles at a funeral. These are that's part of the human condition, and I think in maybe particularly Scottish way. So no, I think humor should just be part of a story, and it should be part of a character. But yeah, you have to make sure you pare it back to not feel it's overwhelming a moment. And certainly should never be creating a situation in a dramatic script and you're doing so because you think it's going to be funny. Or you think this is going to be a funny situation for the character to be in, or they will come out with a funny summary of what's happened. I think it has to be purely dramatically built show, and then within it, when you're testing your character in that moment about how they might react, don't be scared of thinking, well, I think they'd actually say something here that could be quite funny. And make sure you don't have a character that's purely there for comedic effect or
comedy sidekick. Yeah.
You never think, and that character will be funny. That should never be a starting point for involving a character in a story. It's what do they bring to it dramatically. So just getting that right mix. But I kind of feel with Guilt, it was watching the first series, is that the episode 1, I think, was probably a bit more comedic than I would maybe have written it now. Okay. And I think episode 3 and 4 were maybe just a touch more dramatic. I think we'd lost a bit of the humour towards the end, just as the story. I think it made sense because the story was escalating. Yeah. And I think episode 2 was probably about the right blend because it's such a fine balance. But the other thing is that these lighter moments will be the first thing that goes in an edit when you're up against it time-wise. So I think that's what happened in 3 and 4. I think we were quite a bit over. And we just had to keep paring it back, and you end up just really getting down to the nuts and bolts of the story, which does give it a great pace.
And you were also exec producer for Guilt as well. What did that involve?
It just gives you a little bit more involvement, and it maybe puts a little bit more weight to your voice on a kind of collegiate sense. It's a strange thing with that in terms of British TV and American TV. It's obviously very different. In American TV, you might have never written anything at all. You get a show into production and you're not only an exec producer, you're expected to be the showrunner. And that's just the role of the writer over there. And whereas here, you have to really scrap to get, particularly when you start your career, by and large, you do really have to fight to get involvement beyond the scripts, and significant involvement. And it's very easy, I think, as an emerging writer here, you make your first thing to think, well, everyone else knows what they're doing, and I don't want to tread any toes or look egotistical or anything like that. Yeah. And that's kind of bollocks, really. I think you have to learn your craft, and you've got to make sure you let people do their jobs and realise where the line is and all that. But ideally you get to a position, which I'm fortunate enough to have gotten now, where you're just involved across the process in a very respectful way. People have to be allowed to do their jobs, and the director in particular needs to be allowed to take the lead when you get to production. But no, I'm across everything. I'm across, not in a domineering sense, but I've got a voice from casting to.
I was going to ask, because obviously Mark Bonner was in Eric, Ernie and Me. Was that a relationship that you had built up through that, and you wanted him in Guilt as well?
Yeah. So that was kind of how Mark came on board, but then Robbie McKillop, the director, who did such a brilliant job with it, he came in and cast the vast majority of the characters with brilliant casting director up in Glasgow, and they found some amazing suggestions for the different parts. So, and then I go to the set when I think I could be useful. If it's a day where there's a big old dramatic scene getting filmed, or if there's maybe something that we didn't quite nail in rehearsal and we thought would be good to be there on the day. But I mean, with comedy, I'd be in the set all the time because you're tweaking lines and trying out different things. But with drama, I try not to go really. I get rushes with the other producers, and they need to feel the freedom that they can get on with it, and the director needs to be able to form his own relationship with the actors without you kind of lurking about. So it's a bit of a balance, and it comes down to personalities. And again, it's something that can be really productive and positive and a good laugh and collegiate, or can be torturous if the teams are right. But with Guilt, it was very much the positive end of the spectrum, so it's great.
And am I right in saying that at the moment you're working on some scripts for US dramas, and is that a very different feel to when you write for the UK? I'm
developing various things. One in America. It just depends on the producers. I've done some American scripts that were with the real mainstream broadcast networks, and that was pretty tough going. It was very well remunerated, but it was quite difficult in terms of the kind of notes process. And then I've done kind of a couple more cable scripts over there that I really enjoyed. And now I'm doing, again, a kind of cable-y half-hour thing. I'm doing two over there, just scripts. So we'll see what happens. And then various things here as well. So it's, and there's a lot of really, really smart American producers that are brilliant to work with. And again, I think I've learned, and the other thing is that I think I've probably learned something from every development I've done or every show I've written, even if those experiences have been bad. Take the lesson out of it, in terms of, that's not the kind of thing I want to write, or that's certainly not maybe a producer I want to work with again, or why did the script not quite work, and again, be honest with your own feelings within it, and take some learnings from that. So, I work kind of very regularly with a kind of small set of producers now, and I think I find that kind of easier.
Is it important to you to kind of like launch your own show with your own folk that you've written yourself, as opposed to slotting into a show that's already running in a writer's room, perhaps in American style type thing? Is that harder to do for you?
Yeah, I don't think I'd really want to do that, to be honest. I mean, I think if it was an absolutely brilliant show that I really, really loved, and there was amazing writers in the room that I thought I'd really learn from, and a great showrunner, then I think that might be something that I would definitely be interested in chatting about. But by and large, I've got no real interest in joining writing rooms and other shows. I like creating shows. I like writing myself. I think it probably comes from writing books to start with as well. You kind of get used to that individual approach. But no, for me, a lot of the joy is in creating the show, and from a very embryonic idea and building it out from there.
And when you're doing something like that, when you pitch it, for example, for Guilt, do you pitch it to the BBC, or do you pitch it to a production company that then take it to the BBC or whatever channel it ends up on, kind of a thing?
Yeah, by and large, you'll develop an idea with a production company, and historically you'd write a sort of treatment about the show and send it off to the networks and see if they were interested in commissioning a script. Increasingly with drama, production companies are actually commissioning the scripts themselves because the SVODs and Amazon and Netflix and so on, they really want you to have a script when you go to them, if not an episode 2, and if not an actor attached. So they're sort of making that demands of production companies, and as a result, a lot of them, the majority of the script commissions I get now are actually from production companies, and before you even go to the broadcasters.
Okay.
So that's a bit of a sea change in the last few years, and I think it's great for writers because I can take on a lot more commissions basically. Because before, if I had a project to the BBC that they commissioned a script for, I could probably get one more out of them before it would become a bit weird, and they'd be like, "Well, we can't commission it. We've still got 2 things in development." Whereas now, I can almost get as many commissions as I want from production companies, and then write them one after another, and then they pitch them to this exciting new world of maybe a dozen possible homes in the UK and the States.
That's amazing. And so you said you're working on a lot of stuff. Is there anything that's going to be coming out quite soon?
Well, we'll see. As always, it's you never know what's going to make it through to production.
Yeah, imagine if you've got quite a lot of stuff that you put out there, and you have to sit back and wait 2-3 months to know if it goes any further.
Yeah, well, I just write back to back on scripts, and when you send them off for consideration for production, I see it as an unlikely bonus. To be honest, it's just I just write it one after another and crack on with it. Really, I think you've just got to put the work in, and I think production you should see production as something that would be lovely if it happened, but you assume it won't. And I think if you take that attitude, then you can work consistently, because you just make sure you're taking on enough productions to have a year of writing. Otherwise,
would you ever go back to writing a book again, or another form of writing?
I don't think so. No, not for now. I really, really love writing scripts. I think that I really enjoy it. I don't find it in any way as daunting as I used to do writing novels, for example. And I like working with other people, and the thing about scripts is quite quickly you'll be working with your editorial producer. And then obviously if you get to production, you get to work with exciting actors and brilliant directors and editors and everyone else. I really enjoy the team aspect of making television.
What was the last book that you read?
I just reread Stuart, A Life Backwards, because I was on Radio 4 on a good read. They asked me to come on and talk about one of my favourite books. And it's absolutely brilliant. It's Stuart, A Life Backwards by Alexander Masters. It's a true story of a homeless man in Cambridge, but I'd heavily recommend that.
Am I right? I might be totally wrong. Was that made into a TV version?
Yeah, it's made into, I think, HBO and Sky or someone made it into with Cumberbatch and Tom Hardy, I think. Yeah,
wasn't going to be. I've not actually seen it or read it, but I'll have to have a look at that.
I've not seen the adaptation, but the book is brilliant.
Oh, cool. What was the last film you watched?
Oh, what did I watch? I'm working my way through screeners just now. It was I think I watched 1917 last.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that was I thought that was a fantastic film. Do you like it, or you?
Yeah, it was it was such a great ride, wasn't it? It was,
yeah.
So immersive.
When I heard about the whole thing's filmed in like it's one continuous shot, part kind of thinks it's a bit of a gimmick, but I thought it actually added a lot of tension to it because the camera just can't cut away. You're always just forced to watch what's happening.
Yeah, that was impressive. None of the actors went to the toilet as well. How did they manage that?
You a lot of the screeners because are you getting a chance to vote for stuff?
Yeah, I'm in a couple in the Writers Guild in the States and here as well. So I get it's a lovely flurry in sort of late autumn where the postie brings me all the all the films. So it's but no, I'm on the Writers Guild TV committee as well. So kind of voting their awards too. But
do they? So they still send that out physically rather than streaming it?
Yeah, but it seems incredibly wasteful, especially when it's that you've got no intention of watching. But I think they're slowly shifting over. I noticed this year I got quite a few emails with links to digital screeners and things as well.
And what was the last TV show that you watched or are watching at the moment?
My wife and I are working our way back through the West Wing again for I think about the third time in the last 10 years. But it's just brilliant. We've now reached the later series when Sorkin's gone, and it's a big, fairly significant step down in quality. But those early series of the West Wings that Aaron Sorkin, they're just brilliant. I think it's the best writing on television that I've kind of seen in my lifetime.
Fan of him. Although I have to say, the first 4 seasons when he's involved, I think are fantastic. And then he leaves, and I think But I have to say, I thought 6 and 7 were possibly my favourite of the 2 seasons of the whole show. But I loved the running for the election for the next guy, and what they did with that. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
You just feel you can just relax with Sorkin's West Wing. You just know you're in these masterful hands in terms of dialogue and character. It's absolutely brilliant. So, going back through that just now, which is a rare joy.
Nice. I think I read an interesting quote that he said about the West Wing, which was he's never watched a single episode from when he left, and he said either one of 2 things happen: you watch it and it's worse than what you did, and you think, and you feel crap, or it's much better than what you did, and you feel crap. So he said, I'll just feel crap either way, so I'll just leave it.
He said one of his great bits of writing advice is, if you want to have a scene, someone needs to want something, someone needs to want to stop them having it, and then you've got a scene, which is, I think, very excellent advice.
And very, very last thing, it's a quick fire either or answer. So I'll jump in first with Succession or Fargo.
I'd say Succession above the Fargo TV series, and maybe a dead heat in the film. So that's not very quick fire, is it?
No, that's fine. UK crime drama or US crime drama?
Probably US.
TV or cinema?
TV.
A real book or
better wine. You can drink better wine.
Yeah, that's true. A real book or an ebook?
Real book. I've never read an ebook.
Okay. Never?
No.
Fair enough. And last one is fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Takeaway.
especially at the moment. Yeah. See, now I just want to become a writer so I can get lots of screeners sent to me every year. All the Oscar contenders and things like that. Although I can't believe they still send them out physically, as Neil was saying.
It does in this day and age. It does seem a bit nuts that you can't just say here's a code.
Yeah, exactly. Although I suppose maybe but then the piracy existed before when they were sending out on videotape.
Yeah,
and
that's
DVDs,
true.
so
Yeah,
I'm not sure where that is, but I thought that was a really good chat with Neil. I thought he had a lot of hints and tips there.
Yeah, a really fun guy. I think you can tell why he uses humour so well, because he's naturally very good at that, and that does shine through in his work.
Yeah, no, it definitely does.
And some interesting points he had about reading every screenwriting book you can find, even if they're bad, because, as he says, you do take something away from everything you read, whether it's positive or negative, and that's always a learning experience.
Yeah, I think that's right. Even if you read a thing and you say that is completely wrong, then it's taking you a step forward, and as he said, in finding your own voice as to how you want to write. So.
Exactly, and that is the hardest thing is switching from imitating to your own voice, and I think that's what certainly I struggle with the most. And
yeah, I think that's
many things I struggle with.
I think that's true of everyone, though. That you'll start out sort of imitating your favourites, and then over time you will develop that own voice. I think. Yeah,
you kind of amalgamate all these people together and create this new voice from them all.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a rare prodigy that can suddenly emerge with their own voice entirely the first thing they write or anything like that.
Yeah.
So thanks very much to Neil for taking the time to do that. We really appreciated that. And if you haven't seen Guilt, I think it's on iPlayer. It certainly keeps coming back onto iPlayer, BBC iPlayer, that is, if you're in the UK.
It's definitely worth a watch.
And it's definitely worth a watch. It's only 4 episodes, but it's really good. And who have we got on next week, Tarek?
Next week, we're chatting with Harriet Tice, who is the author of Blood Orange, which was a Richard and Judy Book Club choice, I believe, last year, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a domestic noir kind of dark drama.
Yeah.
Best way to describe it.
Yeah, I think so. And if you're not in the UK, you might say, what the hell is the Richard and Judy Book Club?
Good point.
If your book is selected for... Richard and Judy are 2 TV personalities that started a book club, kind of like Oprah, I suppose, in the US has a book club. It's the same kind of idea, except they're not quite as big. But if you get your book onto that book list, then it does phenomenal things for your sales and things like that. So we chat to her all about that and much more about how she, changed from being a criminal barrister to becoming an author. So it's a really good chat. So we hope you tune in for that one.
I'll be honest, I thought Richard and Judy had separated, but clearly I was wrong.
They've stayed together for the book club.
It's for appearance's sake.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, there's
exactly.
real problems in that marriage.
And if you would like to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us an email at podcast@rightgear.co.uk or send us a tweet to our Twitter account, which is @right_gear. And we've also got a Facebook page and Instagram feed as well that you can find.
But that's all from us this week. We will leave you with one little advert for page 1, the writer's notebook, as always. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, see you then. The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the 3rd act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made page 1. Page 1 is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.